Ammunition is cooking off, exploding in every direction. 3 crewmen have already bailed out. 2 more are bleeding to death from their wounds. And the only man left standing is a 5'6" staff sergeant that nobody wanted to fly with. His name is Maynard Smith. His nickname is Snuffy. He's been in England for 6 weeks, and this is his very first combat mission. The radio room was an inferno. The waist section was burning. 3 crewmen made a decision. They bailed out, they jumped into the English Channel, hoping to be rescued, but were never seen again. The tail gunner, Sergeant Roy Gibson, was badly wounded. He couldn't move. Then he turned his attention to the fire. The flames were spreading toward the fuel tanks.
The fire started in the radio room. An oxygen bottle exploded, feeding the flames. The blaze spread with terrifying speed, threatening the bomb bay. If the fire reached the bombs, the entire aircraft would disintegrate in a fireball. On his very first combat mission, Staff Sergeant Maynard Smith found himself in a flying inferno. He grabbed a fire extinguisher and attacked the blaze. When that one ran dry, he found another. When that one was empty, he started looking for anything else he could use. Just then, the German fighters arrived. A pack of FW-190s spotted the crippled B-17 and moved in for the kill. Smith was the only crewman in the back of the plane, still capable of fighting. He ran to the left waist gun, a .50 caliber Browning machine gun mounted in an open window, and opened fire on the attackers. Then he sprinted to the right waist gun and fired from that position. Then back to fight the fire. Then back to the guns. For 90 minutes, Maynard Smith fought a war on 3 fronts. Flames raged on one side. German fighters swarmed on the other, and a wounded crewman lay on the floor, needing constant attention. The heat inside the fuselage became unbearable. Spare ammunition boxers started cooking off, rounds exploding randomly, sending shrapnel flying everywhere. Smith, thinking fast, grabbed the exploding boxers and hurled them out through holes the fire had burned in the fuselage. Anything that wasn't bolted down, he threw overboard. Every pound he ejected made the aircraft lighter, easier for the pilot to fly, and more likely to make it home. When the fire extinguishers were empty, Smith wrapped himself in protective clothing and attacked the flames with his bare hands. He beat at the fire with anything he could find: clothing, blankets, anything. And when nothing else worked, in a final act of desperation, he urinated on the flames, whatever it took. Up in the cockpit, the pilot, Lieutenant Johnson, had no idea what was happening behind him. He just knew his aircraft was still flying. Somehow, despite the catastrophic damage, despite the raging fire, the B-17 was still airborne. He nursed the crippled bomber across the English Channel. Every minute felt like an hour. The controls were sluggish. Cables had been severed. Hydraulics were failing. But the plane kept flying. Finally, they crossed the English coastline. Johnson spotted an airfield and lined up for an emergency landing. The B-17 touched down hard, and then it broke in half. The fuselage, weakened by fire and riddled with holes, simply gave way. The aircraft split into 2 pieces right there on the runway. When rescue crews rushed to the wreckage, they found Staff Sergeant Maynard Smith standing in the debris. He was exhausted, covered in soot and burns, but he was alive. So was the tail gunner he'd been treating for 90 minutes. So were the pilots who'd been trapped in the cockpit. The B-17 had over 3,500 bullet holes and shrapnel impacts. It would never fly again. Lieutenant Johnson, the pilot, was direct in his assessment. He said Maynard Smith was solely responsible for the return of the aircraft and the lives of everyone aboard. The story of Snuffy Smith spread like wildfire. Here was a first-mission gunner, a man nobody even wanted to fly with, who had single-handedly saved a burning aircraft and its crew while fighting off German fighters for an hour and a half. America needed heroes, and Snuffy Smith's story was perfect. An ordinary man displaying extraordinary courage when it mattered most. On July 15th, 1943, the Secretary of War himself, Henry Stimson, flew to England to personally present the Medal of Honor to Staff Sergeant Maynard Smith. It was the first Medal of Honor awarded to an enlisted airman in the European theater. A huge ceremony was arranged. The press was invited. The cameras were ready. There was just one problem. They couldn't find Snuffy Smith. A frantic search began. Officers checked his barracks, the mess hall, the flight line. Nobody had seen him. Finally, someone thought to check the kitchen. And there he was, Staff Sergeant Maynard Harrison Smith, Medal of Honor recipient, standing over a pile of potatoes with a peeler in his hand. KP duty. Kitchen patrol. The classic military punishment. Smith had been late returning from a pass, and his commanding officer had put him on potato duty. He'd completely forgotten about the ceremony. That was Snuffy Smith. In a nutshell, he had just performed one of the most heroic acts in the history of aerial combat, and 2 months later, he was still getting in trouble for the same petty infractions that had defined his military career. They pulled him out of the kitchen, cleaned him up, and rushed him to the ceremony. Secretary Stimson hung the Medal of Honor around his neck, and Maynard Smith became a legend. The press loved it. Andy Rooney, who would later become famous on 60 Minutes, was a young reporter for Stars and Stripes at the time. He wrote a front-page story about Snuffy's heroism. The Office of War Information turned Smith into a symbol of American courage. He was interviewed, photographed, and celebrated. But back at the airbase, the reality was more complicated. Smith flew for more combat missions, but the stress had taken its toll. He was diagnosed with what they called operational exhaustion, what we would now recognize as PTSD. He was permanently grounded, and his old behavior problems resumed. He started signing his letters Sergeant Maynard Smith, CMH, putting the initials of his medal after his name like a British officer. He used his hero status to skip duties and sleep late. He wore out his welcome quickly. In December 1944, Maynard Smith was reduced in rank from staff sergeant to private. A Medal of Honor recipient, demoted. That almost never happens. He was sent home and discharged in May 1945. Despite everything, he received a hero's welcome in his hometown. America wanted heroes, and Snuffy Smith was one. His post-war life was turbulent. He had legal troubles and business failures. He bounced from one venture to another, never quite finding his footing. But he never denied what he'd done on May 1st, 1943. If anything, Ambra said it, sometimes embellishing the story over the years. That was Snuffy. Until the end, he remained exactly who he'd always been. Let's put his actions in perspective. For 90 minutes he fought a fuel-fed fire that threatened to blow the plane apart, administered first aid to a critically wounded crewman, manned both waist guns to fight off enemy fighters, threw exploding ammunition out of the burning plane and extinguished the flames with extinguishers, his bare hands, and his own urine. He did all this on his first mission. When the plane landed, it broke in half, and everyone still aboard survived. Maynard Snuffy Smith died in 1984 and is buried in Arlington National Cemetery, among presidents and generals. His story is complicated. He wasn't a perfect hero from a movie. He was difficult, arrogant, and often his own worst enemy. But on that one day, when his plane was on fire and his crew was dying, he became something more. He became exactly what was needed at exactly the right moment. And that's the thing about heroism. It doesn't care about your personality or if people like you. It doesn't care about your past mistakes. It only cares about what you do when everything is falling apart.